Thanks for joining right at the top of the hour for this kickoff to our series, Collections and Open Access, Resourcing Open Scholarship. And this first session, Access Transformation in a Shifting Landscape. So before turning things over to Lindsay and our fantastic panel, I do want to note just how fortunate we are to have wonderful collaborators in Maria Bond and Will Cross here, and Josh Bullock, who could not join today's session, but will be here in the future. In organizing this series, we collaborated with Josh, Marie, and Will on the first two OA 101 series and their edited book published by ACRL, Scholarly Communication, Librarianship, and Open Knowledge, continues to be an important reference for that work, and also has informed the approach to this series of really trying to bring in those that are doing this work to share that experience and expertise directly. And similarly, we are really fortunate that through that collaboration, we have the opportunity to work with Lindsay Cronk, the Dean of Libraries and University Librarian at Tulane, who has helped to scope and shape this series and these events, and to identify fantastic folks like Annie, Anna, and Miranda to lead these conversations. And with that, I will turn things over to Lindsay to facilitate today's event and introduce the great group that we've got here today. Lindsay, over to you.
Thanks so much, Nick. And big thanks to SPARC and the amazing collaborators that we've had on this. When Josh and the team came to me, it was sort of for those of you who are familiar with Charleston, a sort of directive to figure out how do we build that bridge, right? How do we get to a point where collections and scholarly communication, which are increasingly these intersecting areas where some of the most important questions being asked in scholarly communication are questions that can only be answered with the help of folks with deep expertise and understanding in collections. How do we do that? And how do we do that effectively in a way that honors and upholds the way that SPARC approaches things, very thoughtful, very methodical, very values driven, with some of that scrap magic and fire that you see at a Charleston conference, the sort of ingenuity that it takes to get done, what needs to get done. And so I started to turn to some of my favorite collaborators and some amazing new friends too. So I have the distinct honor and privilege of being joined today by Miranda Bennett, who is Director of Shared Collections at the California Digital Library. Miranda has a long background, including having led the liaison services at the University of Houston, which is where I got my start, for those of you keeping track and score. The incredible Anna Noriega, who is Associate Director and Head of Collections Management at Colby College Libraries in beautiful Maine. And Annie Rao, who does incredible work at the Syracuse University Libraries as Head of Collections and Research Services. So hi, ladies. Thank you for making time. It is delightful to be here with you. And I know you're not going to hold back as we sort of take on our first session, which for those of you who are interested, the sort of format of these three sessions, this one's your classic 101. This is about education, right? But it doesn't mean that we should avoid or duck the hard questions. And I don't want it to be retrograde or reductive or a retread, right, is part of the reason you're going to hear from, I think, a very different set of perspectives. Then we're going to move into those two subsequent sessions, which are going to allow us to really think about the practical realities and the larger implications of the work ahead. And our goal, as always, is to create a welcoming, interactive, and no bad question zone so that we can all hear from one another's perspectives. So as Nick noted, we're going to go off recording at least 30 minutes before this session closes. So just don't hesitate to name names, to ask the question that you've been afraid to ask, to say the quiet part out loud. That really is what we are hoping to accomplish here. And this is not a space in which you will, funny thing. I actually turned 43 recently, and I think the great gift of my 40s has been that I am just no longer embarrassed by anything. And if I had one wish, it's for all of us to sort of live in a way that is not afraid to sort of ask those questions. And I can't imagine, honestly, a better birthday gift to myself than getting to hang out with these three folks and all of you right here to talk about the big questions. So I'm going to get us started here with our first question, which is, you guys, and I love this question so much, so I'm going to really ham bone it here for us. Why is open access work collections work? Annie, will you kick us
Sure.
off?
Yes, I'm going to jump in and go ahead and say, for me, open access work really comes back to the overall goal of collections work, which is curating and making accessible resources for our community. That's the whole goal of collections work from my view. And deciding what we have, curating it alone isn't the only part of it. We also have to make sure it's reachable to all of our users in our community group who need it. And OA just isn't separate from that goal in my perspective. It's just one of the ways in which we accomplish it. It's part of my job to make sure that our students and our faculty and the rest of our users here at Syracuse can find and use those resources. And OA is really just another tool in the larger toolkit that I have as a collection development librarian. So that's how I see them together. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Anna from there.
Thank you. So here at Colby, I would say collections work at a liberal arts college. And I think the person who hired me at Colby is in the audience, Clem Guthrow, if you're there. Hello, thank you. Um, Collections work can include purchasing outside of traditional avenues if you have the budget for it, and that can be a tactic for equalizing. So what Annie said, equalizing what has not always been available to many. And the more closed off the conversation, I think most of us would agree, the less likely it is that an intellectual endeavor scholarship will benefit the future generation. So our collections are important to scholars both at our institutions, but certainly far outside of those institutions. Miranda.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us and for this opportunity to talk about a really interesting topic. So Annie and Anna have said there are several conceptual reasons that open access work is collections work around curation and making resources available. But I admit my mind jumped immediately to more practical considerations for locating open access work within a collections unit, or depending on your organizational structure, perhaps there's just a close engagement with collections unit if the open access decision making is happening elsewhere. Um, your collections people, your acquisitions folks who are working very closely with collection development, we have those established relationships with publishers and vendors. So probably there are conversations about open access that will start in that relationship. In fact, I think just yesterday or the day before, we were talking about an overture from a publisher saying, "Hey, would University of California, which is what CDL is part of, be interested in a read and publish agreement with us?" So that's starting with us because we're in collections. We also have access to funds. Now, of course, there are limits to how those funds can be invested. But if there's an opportunity to repurpose money from traditional collections investments towards support for open access, which can look lots of different ways, that will happen through your collections unit and your collections people. And then there are business models that support open access. And I think Subscribe to Open, which I believe we'll talk a little bit more over the course of our conversation today, is probably the prime example that really are very closely aligned with existing established fully functional workflows that are going through probably your collections, acquisitions, potentially also your cataloging and metadata. So your tech services workflow can really integrate some of these open access business models quite nicely as well. So in addition to philosophically and conceptually, there are very strong arguments for open access being collections work. There are also these practical considerations.
Here, here, Miranda, and I will say, cash rules everything around me, right? We all have to constantly deal with this framework, and if there is to be transformation, if there is, then it has to be through a wholehearted and complete understanding that is based simultaneously in the philosophical and the practical, which is part of the reason I'm so glad that we get to convene around these questions, and brings us to a really great point for question number two, which is what's driving your organization's involvement in open access? And I will say I'm thrilled, just so you know, dear viewers, because dear participants, We have folks from public side, we have folks from private side, we have liberal arts, we have research university. We're gonna try to cover all those bases for you. But our other question is, how do we see the library core values, and we're defining those as access, equity, intellectual freedom, privacy, public good, and sustainability, reflected in the work? Anna Noriega, you're gonna kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I'll say what everyone knows. Libraries have a long history of being values led, right? Those values and our budgets are a tension point, or they can be. But if you can add open access to an existing workflow, as Miranda was saying, if it's built in with the subscribe to open, for example, or some of the other direct to open, read and publish, some of those things, if you have a suite of options, why wouldn't you? It makes it much more appealing for libraries, certainly for me, when there are one or more types of publishing models that fit into existing workflows and provide content that we want anyway, our users would want anyway, in a format that leverages our collective buying power to open. Again, I would just reiterate that one of the values is access, equity, intellectual freedom, all of those things, including publications, should be considered public goods, and open is one way to do it. I'm just thinking also there was a question in the Q&A about how to explain open. I think take existing metrics for an open article. That's how I've been able to talk to older colleagues. And show the impact that that has versus something that's behind a paywall. But sorry, I digress, Miranda.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really important question and gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit about our own contexts. And again, I'm at California Digital Library, which is a system-wide part of the University of California. So I'm working across the 10 UC campuses. And the University of California faculty and administration has a long-standing commitment to open access and some pretty significant expectations for how faculty make the results of their research broadly available and accessible. So I'll put links to these in the chat after I'm done talking. But UC has an open access policy that has been in existence in a system-wide version since 2013. So that applies to articles that are produced by UC authors. In 2018, a system-wide faculty group created, and it was broadly endorsed, a Declaration of Rights and Principles to transform scholarly communication. And these were intended to align our institutional policies and practices toward the goal of replacing subscription-based publishing with open access. So we are under a directive from some of our key stakeholders to pursue open access in a highly assertive, if not actively aggressive way. And so CDL has been very much a part of that. I would say that the primary values here in terms of those library values, clearly access and public good. UC's approach to open access is broad and diverse, but definitely has a very strong element of making UC scholarship broadly available. The scholarship that the university produces represents an enormous resource investment, and then to close that off to only those who can pay to access it is not where we want to be. So this is from the preamble to the 2013 open access policy. This is the system-wide policy. The faculty of the University of California is committed to disseminating its research and scholarship as widely as possible. In particular, as part of a public university system, the faculty is dedicated to making its scholarship available to the people of California and the world. So that's the kind of mandate that we're working under. And it gives us a lot of leverage in negotiations to be able to say, we've got a lot of we got a lot of people behind us in pursuing this. Annie, what would you say from your perspective at Syracuse?
Thanks, Miranda. So here at Syracuse, while we are a research institution, we are a much smaller scale research institution than the UC system. So I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective on the research institution angle. So at my university, we have been under sort of larger university goals to grow our research enterprise and to grow our research output, probably like many of your institutions here. And so while we don't have the exact sort of same do it in an open access mandate from our campus, we do have a very clear signal from campus that all units should be helping to reduce those barriers in growing our research. And here at the library, we see that providing opportunities for open access publishing is one of the ways for us to reduce those barriers for our campus community. And so we do have sort of within our own library strategic plan that we will be growing our opportunities for read and publish agreements regularly throughout the duration of our strategic plan. And we do a whole number of other types of investment in open access and publishing both in the journal side of things and in other formats, because we also really see that this is driven by our goals of access and equity and the way that we're choosing to do it. Especially equity across our own campus is a way that we're trying to really view this lens. So in this sort of goal to drive our overall research, we have disciplines that are well-funded, that have established paths for grants and grant funding that it can absorb APCs into their costs. But here at Syracuse, we're traditionally more of a social science and humanities-based institution. So we have lots and lots of disciplines that have no grant funding at all or minimal grant funding, where this sort of APC model is really outside of the scope of what individual authors can contribute or can participate in. So what we've been doing with our strategic plan and having our read and publish agreements is to make sure that we have access across our campus to open access publishing opportunities across all of our disciplines. And so that's really some of the strategy here at Syracuse. We know that offering sort of these RMPs give opportunities to journal article authors in all fields, not just our heavily grant funded fields. And similarly, supporting and publishing our own Diamond Open Access journals is also part of this strategy, because there are just disciplines where that is the model that serves them best and gives them opportunities to participate in a scholarly communication or in scholarly conversation with their community. I will, in honoring Lindsay's spirit of being fully transparent and saying what I want to say, because I'm also 43, we still have a long way to go to extend the support to the monograph-based disciplines. We know that we're trying to work on it and figuring out how we can continue to use our collections dollars to support those disciplines across campus. So I'm not going to say we're doing it perfectly, but a lot of our work is based on sort of disciplinary and opportunity across our disciplinary equity and opportunity across our campus.
Bravo, Annie. I will say, like, it's one of those tensions. I love the conversations that's taking place in the chat, and I just want to encourage people to continue to use it in that way. I do think that one of the tensions that I'd be really open to exploring with all of you who are participating is the difference between a public institution with a mandate, right, and a private institution with some goodwill, right? And what's possible and what isn't in terms of how we shape a culture that wants to make knowledge more open. Particularly again in this particular moment we called it the shifting landscape, you guys, because the landscape is moving, and it's being moved by many actors. And one of them is federal policy right now. So y'all, I'm going to turn to you with our next question, which is, what collections decisions are being shaped by federal policy right now? Miranda?
Yes, this is a challenging topic to talk about in terms of being recorded, not because I'm worried that I'll say something untoward, but this may not apply tomorrow. Who knows? Because this is all changing very quickly. So a couple of things that come into play for us as far as making collections decisions and open access decisions specifically, of course, this has to do with federal grant funding. University of California, at a system level in fiscal year 2024, received a total of about 5 billion, that's billion with a B, in total federal agency research funding. So this is a big deal for us. So part of this one element of this that comes into play, of course, is compliance. So compliance with public access requirements. So as documented in the 2022 Nelson memo, which required immediate public access to publications that have resulted from federal research grant funding. And it's really important for us to advocate for UC authors when we're negotiating with publishers, giving them the options that they need in order to comply with any kind of grant requirements. And again, it's primarily these coming from federal funders, but other grants, other granting organizations certainly have expectations about public or open access as well. So this might mean negotiating agreements that support the version of record being open access at the publisher site, so what gets called gold open access. We might also have language in our agreements that allow for the author's accepted manuscript or the version of record to be open access in an institutional, disciplinary, or other repository. So this would be what gets called green OA. And the CDL also is responsible for e-scholarship, which is has a couple of things, a couple of very important open access things going on. One of which is it serves as the University of California's institutional repository, so it becomes a green open access option for articles. It also operates a very robust Diamond Open Access publishing program. So, Diamond Open Access, as Annie indicated, is an important part of the overall strategy. So we're very aware of these. We often have, dedicated conversations in our negotiations where our experts are talking to the publisher's experts specifically about compliance issues for publishing the results of grant-funded research, particularly federally funded. Of course, with all of this, and this will come up, I think, when we talk about some of the funding questions as well, there's a giant flashing neon asterisk attached to anything we say about federal funding right now because of the Office of Management and Budget's proposed changes to the uniform guidance or the guidance for federal financial assistance. I think we talked about having a dedicated expert on our panel today, but sorry, I think you're just stuck with me. And maybe my fellow panelists can say a little bit more about this, but this could certainly have a significant impact on how UC approaches support for open access, because as we may talk about in more detail later, several of our publisher agreements do have a financial model that incorporates direct grant funding, so directly from authors making the choice to bring grant funding to bear on the costs of open access. So the federal question is a very live one for us, how that intersects with our collections and particularly open access decision making, but it's been part of those conversations for a long time.
Yeah, just to hop on this a tiny bit, from my perspective as someone who works on the Association of Research Libraries Advocacy and Public Policy Committee, I just want to say that I think that we're only seeing, even as we begin to dissect the OMB and its potential implications, like one of the small pieces I brought to a conversation recently with my provost and my fellow deans was actually this restriction they were trying to place on using grant funds for conference travel. Right. And on the surface level to folks, I think this just sounds like, oh, well, why are they traveling? Like travel is such a, like the use of the word, it feels like it's purposefully diminishing what is a crucial part of scholarly communication, which is being present with your colleagues and peers and exchanging ideas, right? And then the ensuing conference proceedings, which are often some of our earliest indicators of where a field is going, right? There's going to be a lot for us to contend with in our already limited budgets around this. And when I think about where collections will assist in the future, it's hard because that tightening means that we have less latitude at the outset to think creatively, right? And I think that what we're going to be expected to absorb is just going to rise. I am often sort of characterized as a Pollyanna in the field, so forgive me for that little note of gloom. But I would love and welcome, right, input around what I am missing in that piece of the conversation. Anna, did you have anything you wanted to add in terms of this question of federal policy? So much is unknown.
Yeah, I don't. Colby's in a very privileged position in that we don't get quite a lot of federal funding, and when we do, it's cross-connected to other institutions who are the primary grant receivers, so we will be impacted down the road. And I think this is probably true for most universities and colleges that aren't our ones. So we hope that things turn in our favor.
As someone who's at an R1 that is still trying to build its research muscle, right? Like we're all watching this with concern. So I'll move on to the next question, I think, which is, and I love this one because I love to think about and talk about decision making. So what does your open access decision making process look like? And some of the questions that are popping up are beginning to pop up in our Q&A, I think are getting at this. And how does it intersect with other collection decisions? Anna Noriega, you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure. I hope this comes across as I intend it, and that is that Colby, Bates, and Bowdoin are in a consortia, and we hold an extremely privileged position within the state of Maine in terms of buying power. And so when we're talking about collections, at least for Colby, I know for Bates and Bowdoin, somewhat true as well, at least, we are thinking about the entirety of the state. And so it isn't simply for us a read and publish agreement that is the best option or the only option even. What I've tried to do over the last 13 years here is carve out increasing percentages of our regular budget to go direct to open. So for us, it's not just philosophical. Our materials are used very widely across the state, and people do visit to use the materials that are held here at these 3 small liberal arts colleges. So part of the decision making is in that CBB group, Colby, Bates, Bowdoin, but it's also really, really foundational to what the Colby libraries have always done, which is be committed to the collective collection. So things that are open one time, that's great. Diamond open is great, but it isn't our main focus. Our main focus is much larger. And so I think in the third session of these series, we'll hear more about that perspective from lyricists about funding totally open from the beginning. And I think that percentage carving out, no matter what your budget is, you can do a little bit. And lyricists and others provide a way to do that where you can support programs, not in their entirety, but at least on some level. So I do want to talk more about the options, but yes, that's how I talk to the liaison librarians all the time, and talking to colleagues across the country who are in similar positions in liberal arts colleges. So there's a lot of important decision making that happens on a collective level, I'd say.
Thanks, Anna. Miranda, did you want to hop in a little on that system and consortia side or?
Sure. Since it looks like at least at the moment we're doing okay for time, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about so Anna's in one version of a consortium of the 3 colleges in Maine. University of California is a system, not a consortium, but we still have some of the same challenges and opportunities around collective decision making. So when we are making decisions about collections, we have a couple of key stakeholder groups that cross the entire system that very much come into play. So it's never the case that CDL gets to unilaterally decide, oh, we're going to support this open access initiative, or hey, here, look, this publisher just sent us a read and publish agreement. Let's go. It doesn't work that way at all. It's much more, there's a lot more complexity to it, as you can imagine. A lot of governance that happens. So we have a shared content leadership group. So this is a representative group from each of the 10 campuses in CDL. It's usually their chief collection development officer and AUL, head of collections, that kind of thing. And that group oversees system-wide collection development, both very involved with conventional subscription agreements, but also definitely has a role to play in decision making about agreements that support open publishing, as well as investments in other kinds of open access, so subscribe to Open Diamond, those kind of models. And then we also have another system-wide group called the Project Transform Working Group, which includes subject matter experts from CDL. It includes high-level library leadership. So there are university librarians who are part of this group, and there are faculty representatives. So this is a really interesting group to work with. So we have a really diverse group of stakeholders very involved in decision making about our open access agreements that support open publishing. Um, and these two groups working together have primary responsibility for the system level collections decisions. The question about the intersection with collections decision making, unfortunately, we're seeing that come into play more around potential cancellation decisions than at this point starting up something new. Like many libraries, we're just in a tough budget spot. But it's there are different considerations when you're contemplating when you're assessing and contemplating for cancellation any kind of open access agreement. The consequences are different. If it is an agreement that supports open publishing, you really have to think about this is something authors have had access to. They're not going to have access to it anymore. What are the politics of that, and what does that mean for the library's reputation? And then just practically, how do you back out of that? How do you wind down those commitments? And with something like a Diamond Open Access Agreement or Subscribe to Open, your decision has consequences for lots of other people, lots of other libraries. And what does it mean to make you're empowered to make that decision locally, but it's going to have these far-reaching consequences in a different way than saying, okay, we're dropping this subscription. Our folks don't have access anymore. What's our alternative access plan? How are we going to lean on resource sharing, that kind of thing.
Thanks so much, Miranda. So, Annie, you want to talk about it for
Yeah.
those of us who are a little bit more operating
Yeah.
on our own?
Yes, I will definitely talk about sort of the individual institutional perspective. And I think sort of both of my colleagues were bringing up both the topic of renewing and versus new and the question around new content and redirecting resources, but also the reality of canceling, because that is all part of the collections decision. The collections decisions are not just buying more things and more things and more things. It's a series of different decisions that go into this at all times. Though I will maybe give you a very simplified kind of first part to my answer, which is at Syracuse, the OA decision making looks exactly the same as sort of our other collections content decision making. We evaluate resources, open access resources, whether they be read and publish agreements or subscribe to open journal articles or new sort of lyricist funded Diamond Open Access journals right alongside each other. We have a fairly centralized collection development decision-making process that takes the input of our subject liaison librarians as well as our open scholarship librarians. So I don't want to jump too far into our next question, but takes the input of all of those stakeholders into these decisions. But the decisions are really based around our criteria that are the same no matter the funding model of the resource. Does it meet the research and curriculum needs of Syracuse University? Is the content unique, or do we already have something that'll meet that need? Can we afford it? Those are really sort of our big collections questions anytime we're looking at adding, renewing any part to our collection, no matter how the economic model for creating and sustaining that collection works. So content really comes first, and that's how we can kind of make sure that we are on track with what our responsibility is for stewarding our resources here. The renewal piece, though, is really where some of this how do things look piece for me is interesting, because Miranda mentioned our subscribe to open, and that is one of the places where we see that working exactly the same as all of our other journal renewal products. So if you're in a workflow where you make decisions around journals, or if you're in a workflow where you have sort of criteria that you've set that says, if it doesn't increase more than X% and it's not in a discipline that your campus is no longer serving, automatically renew. Just because something has flipped from a paywalled resource to subscribe to open, it just sort of sails right through that that workflow that's already established for all of our other resources. So some other things about sort of all of our evaluation pieces, there's a lot of other things for me that look the same. We still need to evaluate websites to see if they comply with things like accessibility requirements. So no matter if it's a Diamond Open Access journal, or if it's a read and publish agreement, or if it's some other type of open access or open product, all of those things are the same and still apply. Other things that sort of still apply, at least in our situation, they're exactly kind of the same, is when we're considering a read and publish agreement, we consider it at time of renewal. So one of our, maybe our tricks that we want to share from the collection side of things is we don't make decisions about everything every year. So lots of us enter into multiple year agreements because the amount of work that goes into deciding if you're going to renew your Wiley package every year is huge. There's also cost savings reasons for doing it. But we don't deviate from that schedule just because something is open access. It might be that we have a campus, interest, or we get, deans that say, we'd really like open access publishing opportunities in X resource. And we say, great, that 3-year deal isn't up for renewal until 2028. So we'll talk to you about it then. So those are some other pieces that stay the same, at least through our workflows here at Syracuse. Oh, and then I think actually one other note on things that are different was, sorry, I have a lot to say on this, is some of our own Diamond Open Access publishing that we do here at Syracuse University. So turns out that can actually be a little bit different because moving money internally is almost trickier than paying other people to do things. And so as we have ventured into our own publishing in this sphere and looking at other sort of services that we can add to that publishing, taking actual money and moving it sort of out of the collections budget and paying for a thing that we're doing somewhere else can be one of the trickiest things to pay for on a campus. So that does sometimes, it's not the decision making that's different, but the actual execution of that decision can be a little bit different.
Yeah, we have limited time, but I do want to ask the question just because I think it's and to introduce it almost for all of you again who are joining us today, which is how is the growing amount of content that is available open right now, like all of the open content in the world, starting to impact local collections decisions? And do we anticipate at any point that providing relief right around this? And I will say, from my perspective, the answer is absolutely not. But I wanna open the door. I want to hear from folks that are making some of those other decisions. I will say the explosion of content will, with one other aspect of the shifting landscape, the rise of artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence, I anticipate we will only see more content, right? And then on the side, whenever we are negotiating with publishers, we will only hear that we are getting more, right, for whatever we are paying. So, anyone have thoughts around like, are we finding, yeah, we're seeing some good stuff here in the chat, so you're all prepped for that. I'm going to keep us moving because otherwise, y'all, we're gonna fall down this hole. So, how closely, as collections folks, do you work with Skullcom colleagues and subject librarians on OA decision making? And this does actually mirror one of the questions that has also popped up in the chat. We'll explore it further as needed. But what do you wish non-collections colleagues understood about this work?
Okay, I'm going to jump in first because I alluded to this in my last question. But here at Syracuse, this sort of intersection of our SCOLCOM, subject librarians, and collection librarians is exactly how we're organized. So the department I lead is made up of those 3 types of librarians, and we make these decisions around sort of the intellectual content of our collection collaboratively across those 3 types of librarians and a few other folks who are in the room at the same time. But so when we have, so in the case of a read and publish agreement, when we have a vendor coming to Syracuse to pitch us about, upgrading our package to a read and publish agreement, and here's all the Syracuse University authors that you can support, the subject librarians who work directly with those faculty members and those authors are in the room to hear it, as well as our open scholarship librarian, who at the end of the day at Syracuse is the place where we administer our read and publish agreements. So if there's sort of an admin function that needs to happen, it happens in that office. So then back to my sort of, there's also renewal decisions point is when it comes time to choose to continue or not, that's all right part of the discussion again. So were the authors happy with the agreement from the liaison's perspective? Did they get a lot of complaints that like they couldn't actually use the system? Did the open scholarship librarian have to do a lot of work behind the scenes because an individual or because a particular platform just was never showing our Syracuse authors that they had this opportunity? So all of those are sort of right in the mix in how we collaborate around open access decisions.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks, Annie, and add just a little bit more. So, over the course of my career, as Lindsay said, I was at University of Houston working in a liaison services department, but I was a collections person. So their collections was really tightly aligned with a public services unit. I then was an associate dean at University of South Carolina, where I was essentially overseeing technical services, but I was a collections person there. And now I'm working at the system level at University of California. So I've seen lots of different models of engagement here. I do think it's very important that subject librarians be involved in the conversation because they can contribute real insight into disciplinary differences in attitudes towards open access. And Annie was kind of getting at this when she was describing how Syracuse is looking for that equity across the access to or the open access opportunities that their faculty have across disciplines. So that's really important and kind of gets into those questions of, well, what if there are different formats and things like that? So articles versus books. Um, and and also building on what Annie was just saying a minute ago, liaisons and scholarly communication librarians are often more public facing, so they have more access to and engagement with faculty and students. So it's really important that those of us working in collections are giving them the resources they need, the information that they need to communicate about open access, especially as Annie was talking about. It's important that they are getting the message out that these opportunities for open access publishing are available through library investments.
Thanks so much, Miranda. And yeah, I do think that it's something I always think about in these conversations is who gets called a collections librarian, right? As someone who has always lived very, very firmly between the more back of the house side of how do we actually bring the collections online, how do we actually make them discoverable, and the public side of here's this beautiful gift of a collection that we are trying to put together for you, which there's a very fun and juicy question lurking in our questions box that I want to draw the panelists' attention to that we'll get to, which is a little around this notion of ownership, right? And what distinguishes your collection and the ways that that is sometimes in conflict with a more open scholarship future. But as we again dwell in the practical and the high-minded, you guys, is your library, and libraries plural, expected to absorb OA costs out of existing budgets, or have you built cross-campus partnerships or established other funding sources to share them? Randy, you want to talk about UC multi-payer?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And as I said earlier, all of this needs to be taken with a big OMB sized grain of salt because a lot of this could really change. So this multi-payer model, which UC has pioneered and had in place with a number of our open publishing agreements, our transformative agreements for several years, this is a way of bringing grant funding directly into the support for open access publishing. So our agreements that incorporate this model, they bring the university's entire investment with the publisher. So the historical library spend and article processing charges in the wild, so the ones that have been paid directly by authors to publishers, bringing that under one umbrella for cost containment purposes. And so we really understand what's going on across the board. In many cases, UC's publication volume is such that the library could not afford to absorb this total investment. So the agreement builds in a step into this shows up in the author workflow that enables the author to contribute grant funding if they have it to support that open access publishing of their article. And you can imagine if it turns out that the federal government is not going to allow publication costs on grants, this would be a problem. So you can see where there's a little bit of tension there for the moment. Our agreements provide all authors with some level of support. So there's they would still be paying less than they would have paid without the agreement out of their grants. And nearly all of our agreements do enable authors that don't have grant funding or that opt out to get OA publishing at no charge to them. So it does offer overall cost control, but it depends on this individual author choice because with the current structures in place, this is the only way we know of to manage that financial flow so that grant funding comes into the support for open access publishing that the library provides through its agreements. And again, the proposed changes to the uniform guidance from the federal government would likely require us to really change this approach. So we're now in this contingent space of trying to figure out A and B options with our agreements. But this is a model that has served UC well and has allowed for some level of a pretty impressive level actually of overall cost containment.
Annie and Anna, I'm going to give you a collective 3 minutes on this because our next question is meaty, and then we're going to move into the closed session if that's okay. What you got on your side about how do we absorb OA costs? And it's at Tulane, we were expected to absorb those out of our collections costs. We contribute to a SIPS fund, which is the provost's sort of high impact open publications fund, which handles individual APCs.
Interesting. I can also share that here at Syracuse, the cost sits entirely within the library budget for some of the reasons I shared earlier around just sort of the scale that we're working with, the amount of output, the amount of faculty, publications, and sort of how our disciplines are distributed is radically different than what Miranda's situation is. So here the cost does currently sit within the library budget. I kind of love this question. I get it pretty often. And I particularly usually get it in the frame of like, how is the library getting other money to do this? Our view is that sort of the library has been tasked with stewarding the university resources on behalf of the institution. They're all the university's resources. We just have a piece of it that we're responsible for. And the investment in scholarship is the responsibility that we have, and we've been, tasked with deploying that. So that has also provided, though, us to sort of work in this role as the expert for this on campus. We're not subject to asking other people on campus if this model works, if they want to continue, because we have taken ownership of it, both in the work and also in the payment side of things. Anna, do you have anything you wanted to add in the last minute of this answer?
Sure. Yeah, I would say the library, when the question is, or is the library expected to absorb OA costs? I mean, part of that are going to be the APC charges. So no, on that front, we are not expected to. Anything that we decide to open or provide funding to open is a library-wide discussion, as I said, and typically we're taking into account our entire acquisitions budget. So yes, anything that we do is built on our existing budget, but somebody else mentioned canceling big packages, and I can talk more when we stop recording about that, how that's helped us shift to more open, immediately open materials. But the most important thing I would say for a small school like Colby that is in Maine, it's in rural Maine, it's residential, undergraduate only. So it's a very specific kind of place, is working. We're very lucky to work with supportive people in the provost's office, crafting meaningful policy and providing our skills as librarians to support faculty across the campus. So certainly what you said, Anne, touches upon something I hold near and dear, which is the humanities at Colby are supported equally in the endeavor of open access. So we've had, and I can name presses that are outstanding, again, off recording time, who provided Colby with the means and methods to offer at no additional cost open access publishing for our humanities folks. So yeah, there are a couple of stars in my mind.
That's wonderful. So it's our last on the record question, which is how do you assess open access investments? And how is that different from how you assess other products, if at all? So Miranda, you ready to go?
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I think we all wanted to speak to this, so I'll try to go fast. So I would say with transformative and other open publishing agreements, these are shifting the value that the library gets away from access to closed content and toward opening content produced by affiliated authors. So then it's important to assess the impact of scholarship published with supportive agreements. For example, like global usage of articles published with supportive agreements of an agreement or citation to those articles rather than the usage of the closed content. So that's a tricky, it's sort of flipping the usual usage question. It's still about usage, but it's looking at it from a very different angle. And I will say also in terms of cost containment, which is an important part of assessment, we've done we're very privileged and fortunate to have really a lot of data expertise behind our open access efforts. And so we've done some pretty sophisticated analysis comparing the cost of our TAs, read and publish agreements, to sort of alternative history of if we had kept conventional content access subscriptions in place, and we've seen that actually we're doing pretty well. We're getting really good value because we are also getting that open publishing on top of the content access to the extent that there, of course, is still content behind a paywall.
Who wants to go next?
I can go.
Okay.
Annie, do you want to go? Go ahead.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and just give a few examples of some of the ways that we assess our non-transformative agreements, because I think Miranda explained really well some of the same strategies that we're doing, probably not as complexly as they are in our assessment of those, but some of the other things that we also still need to continue to assess that should we continue to invest in around our subscribe to open journals, our Diamond open access journals, and as well as some other things that we haven't touched on, like shared primary source projects that we've supported open access shared primary source projects. We still look at some of the same criteria. Is it still relevant to SU? Has a program changed? Has a curriculum changed? Like probably a number of you all on the call, we have just had a major shift in some of our programs and what programs we're continuing to offer. So we do have to look closely, even if there's good use or low cost, if it's still aligned with the curriculum and the focus of the university. And then other things that we look at when we know usage statistics don't tell the whole story, because the things are open access, we're not getting the same kind of usage statistics. We look at, are there Syracuse University authors involved? So do we still have authors on the editorial boards of these Diamond open access journals? Are they still on the content boards for some of these shared primary source projects? We look at things as simple as LibGuide clicks. So maybe we don't have actual usage statistics once we head into a resource, but they had to find it somewhere, at least we hope so. And so was it used, from our campus? Can we see some sort of connection there? So we do have to be much more creative about how we assess these, but we do have sort of ways to make sure they're still relevant to our campus. Anna, do you want to end us on this one?
I guess I would just add that this is the billion-dollar question. I don't think anyone's figured out. Annie, you just named all the lists that are in my head as well. You go through the resources like you would anything, and usage is one component, though, as you said, you sometimes have to be creative. I did want to tell the acquisitions folks in the audience, though, about an article and an issue that's come up over and over, which is AI usage and counter. And so there's a question of how do you gather article level usage statistics? Well, one of the metrics is unique uses. So I think for me, that's the journal metric that I would use, the counter report. I don't remember the exact JR1. I don't know what it's called now. But I wanted to say about the AI usage and counter is that counter has, of course, been on top of the issue, and yeah, TRJ1 usually, exactly. The great news is that the folks working on it have figured out how to separate AI metrics. So when is something being used? For me, that's a really important thing. Our usage statistics, like everyone else, has probably gone down incredibly quickly since 2020. And I don't know if it's ever going to go back. And so that cost per use isn't quite the gold standard as it was anyway. add in AI usage, and there's some interesting components to figuring out how to, I'm going to paste this article into the chat here, because I think it's really valuable for us to be thinking about the various sort of the usage, sure, but one of the questions in Q&A was about ownership. I don't really think about ownership so much. I really think about the collective collection more than anything. And so if we don't own it at Colby, I don't need to sell it to folks here. It's owned by virtue of being a public good. So back to the values question. This article, though, is from the folks at Counter, and it explains what's going on. And we shouldn't expect to see anything great or meaningful until next year. But it is something to keep in mind for the acquisitions folks in the audience.
Well, thanks so much for that, Anna. And I gotta say, extra points for finishing exactly on time, everyone. For those of you who are watching the recording, I hope that this first hour serves as an incentive that now you're gonna sign up and participate in the conversation in real time, because at this point, we're gonna turn off that recording, Nick Shockey, and we're gonna move into closed session.